May 31st in 1985 was a day that many Ontario residents won't forget, as they ended up witnessing a tornado with one of the longest tornado tracks in Canada's history, a record that has already been beaten in the 40 years since this tornado occurred. Across the day there were 14 tornadoes of note, with multiple of them having dire effects on the communities that they hit. In total, across all of the tornadoes that day, hundreds were injured, over 1,000 buildings were damaged and destroyed, and 12 people lost their lives. As of present day, it ended up being the 4th deadliest tornadic day in Canada's history. One particular tornado on that day stood out more than the rest though, and is what led to a record that has barely been beaten in the 40 years since it occurred. This all started in Arthur, Ontario, as a tornado of F4 intensity touched down. It was around 4:15 PM and the third tornado of the day touched down just northwest of Arthur, Ontario. It began tracking in an easterly direction and stayed planted in that direction for its entire duration. Several rural communities have resided along its path between Arthur and Mount Albert, and the first notable community to take a hit from the tornado ended up being Grand Valley. The town was wildly unprepared for what was about to happen as it took this hit from the tornado. It was just 13 minutes since the tornado had initially touched down, and all residents knew about at the time was a severe thunderstorm warning. A tornado warning had not been issued at that point, and back in 1985 these were very new to Canada. As the tornado hit Grand Valley at 4:28 PM, it left an unimaginable amount of damage behind. Most of the buildings in the town ended up being absolutely decimated, which would ultimately lead to the loss of life for 2 people. One man was struck whilst out in his pickup truck, and a woman was killed when she was sucked out of her house from the tornadic winds. For a lot of the residents, they suffered injuries to varying degrees as they watched structures collapse around them. A lot of those that were injured, including multiple children, were incredibly lucky to walk away with only minor injuries. After the devastation in Grand Valley, the town did absolutely nothing to slow this tornado down as it continued its path eastward across the province. The next town in its path, Orangeville, would see the tornado pass just 4 kilometers north of the downtown core. The tornado ended up crossing Highway 10 and absolutely decimating a strip mall which was known as Mono Shopping Plaza. The plaza suffered heavy damage, with more than half of the large 2-acre structure being reduced to nothing more than a pile of rubble. Debris from the hit was strewn hundreds of meters downwind and caused injuries in the process. Most of the injuries were minor, however one person did suffer serious injuries. Unfortunately for the residents of Orangeville, the plaza wasn't where the tornado's destruction would end. If anything, it was just the beginning, as dozens of rural residences and farms were badly hit. A good majority of them needed to be rebuilt after being hit, and a community south of Tottenham saw the loss of 2 people. Some buildings in this area were wiped clean off their foundations, and a total of 25 families lost their homes just in this area alone. The tornado had been on the ground for almost an hour at this point, and it was now crossing over Highway 400, north of the Holland Marsh. Now aptly named Tornado Drive, after this incident, including neighbouring roads, saw hundreds of large willow trees being ripped to shreds as they were strewn all over the area by the tornado. Once again, a large number of agricultural properties also saw heavy damage here. This was the first time in the tornado's life that it actually showed signs of weakening, as by the time it reached the communities of Asnelveld and East Gwillimbury, it was only able to inflict minor to moderate damage on these areas. Further downwind of these communities, Mount Albert received a lot less damage, as the majority of the damage seemed to be isolated to uprooted trees and light structures. 9 kilometers later, and the tornado finally came to the end of its life, 115 kilometers and an hour after it first touched down. After detailed ground and aerial surveys of the incredibly long destruction path, they found that 100 buildings had been destroyed and 200 had been damaged. As for the human side of things, at least 69 injuries were reported and 4 people lost their lives. It was estimated that this tornado caused $2.5 million Canadian dollars in damage at the time. The 115-kilometer damage track was one of the longest that Canada had seen, and from what I can find hasn't been beaten since. I can only see one tornado which came close since 1990, which was a 1991 tornado in Quebec that was on the ground for 98 kilometers. I know a lot of people in these affected communities remember that day well, and it's hard to forget it. I suspect a large number of people you speak to in those areas today were either affected by it or came close to it. It's a day that is commonly referred to as Black Friday, similar to the Edmonton tornado that would occur 2 years later in 1987. If you were affected by this tornado and made it this far, then do let me know your experience in the comments below. Has anything else ever come close to the feeling that tornado caused on that day? Once again, thanks for watching everyone. Please do drop a like or a dislike. and subscribe to the channel for more videos on Canadian tornadoes. There's still plenty out there left to discuss.